And I guess finally, one of the things that we were just sitting here talking at our table, we started out with kind of the general political discussion that you would expect to have occur, but we very quickly got down to questions by both our senators and congressmen. So what's going on? What do we need to work on? Is the economy good? Are there issues that we need to deal with? And it didn't take us long to get down into the weeds and start talking about very specific problems that we think we can solve in this state and that we need the help of our delegation to fix. I don't think that happens in many other places either, and it really is important that we take advantage of this opportunity to let our elected officials know what we think, how they can help, and then engage with them in some way to help move those agendas forward. So take advantage of this opportunity that you have here today. You have access, unusual access from what I hear from my peers across the country, and I hope you all take advantage of it. Speaking of unusual access, when I tell my peers across the country that I have the governor's mobile phone number, and that if he's not golfing, he actually picks it up and answers it when I listen. And if he is golfing, someone does pick up the phone and say, the governor will be with you right away. And he actually will engage in solving problems and will be at our events in our community. And it's actually more normal to see him at events than to hear that he could not make an event. They're very, very envious. I've been now in 4 different states doing economic development and chamber work, and I've never seen the access that we have to this governor on local issues as well as state issues and economic development, client entertainment issues. So we're blessed to have a governor that supports business, that supports business development, that is the chief cheerleader for economic development in the state, who's willing to roll up his sleeves and make a difference. I know personally on the Yahoo project that the governor gave all their key people his phone number, and when they weren't calling him frequently enough, he started calling them. And he was bound and bent to make sure that they weren't just being shy, that he was actually going to be there to help them, and he wanted to make sure that they knew that. That's an unusual tack, and it's something that we should be very grateful of. So let's give another warm Nebraska welcome to the governor of the great state of Nebraska, Governor Dave Heineman.
David, thank you very much. And first of all, I look around the room and I see so many friends. I want to thank you for coming from the Sandhills, your golf event, to come here to play today. I know that was a difficult task for all of you to come off the golf course, but we appreciate it. And I want to start by thanking you for what you do for the state of Nebraska. We have a remarkable state where the business community is engaged. You work with us on a variety of issues, and I'm going to share with you together what we've been able to accomplish. Let me just say, Nebraska is on the move. We are in better shape than the rest of the country because we don't spend money we don't have. We don't do it in our family budgets, we don't do it in our business budgets, and we don't do it in state government. We balance our budget by controlling spending, not by raising taxes. We passed the largest tax relief package in the history of the state. We modernized our economic incentive programs called the Nebraska Advantage, and as you know, it has been incredibly successful. We've opened new trade offices in Tokyo and Shanghai. We've invested in our most important priorities, education and jobs. And look at the results. And I want to take a moment to share these with you. It's a long list, but I'm going to read them to you and make sure you know. Many of you have heard some, but not all of them. CNBC ranks Nebraska as one of America's top 10 best states for business. Forbes ranks Nebraska as the 8th best state for business and careers. Business Facility says Nebraska has one of America's top 10 best business climates. Gallup says Nebraska is the 4th best state to live in. MarketWatch says Omaha is the 2nd best city in America for business. Forbes ranks Omaha as the 5th best city for young professionals. Parenting Magazine ranks Omaha as the 2nd best city in America with the best economy for families. Forbes ranks Lincoln as the best city in America for new jobs. AOLjobs.com ranked Lincoln as the best city in America to find a new job in 2012. Forbes ranks Lincoln as the 7th best place for business and careers. CNN Money ranks Papillion as the 5th best place in America to live. Bloomberg Business Week identified Arlington, Nebraska as the 2nd best place in America to raise kids because it's a Midwestern farming community with top-notch schools. That is Nebraska. And you can substitute for Arlington, Falls City, Nebraska City, Wahoo, Seward, Holdridge, McCook, Chadron, Alliance, Valentine, all the cities in our state. That really reflects who we are. Safe communities, good jobs, great schools, affordable homes, and an unmatched quality of life. And one of the most recent ones, the Tax Foundation rated Nebraska as the best state in the United States of America to start a new business relative to taxes and regulation. As I've said, Nebraska is on the move, and we know we need to continue making progress. Now, let's compare what Nebraska has done with the federal government and the present administration's policies. Too much spending, higher taxes, too much regulation, and Obamacare. And look at the results. A stagnant national economy, businesses unwilling to invest because of the uncertainty of taxes, regulation, and health care, and an unemployment rate of 8.3%, more than double that of Nebraska's unemployment rate. Now, there's one other issue I want to bring to your attention that the President and the Congress need to address that will likely impact everyone in this room and many, many, many middle-class Nebraska families: the alternative minimum tax. If adjustments aren't made to the alternative minimum tax, the Nebraska Department of Revenue estimates that Nebraskans will pay an additional $387 million in federal taxes in this tax year. That's a $387 million tax increase on Nebraskans if the federal government doesn't take corrective action. Frankly, as we all know, the current administration needs to use Nebraska as a model for moving the nation's economy forward. Balance the budget by controlling spending, lower taxes, and reduce regulation. We've demonstrated that it can work here in Nebraska. So in closing, I want to say to you again, thank you for your leadership, your commitment, and your dedication to responsible fiscal policies that have Nebraska on the move. I appreciate it, our citizens appreciate it, and I am proud of what this business community does for our great state. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tom Whalen. I'm Vice President of Human Resources for Blue Cross Blue Shield of Nebraska. I'm also a past chairman of the Nebraska Chamber of Commerce and Industry, which this year is celebrating its 100th anniversary. On behalf of all the chambers hosting this event, thank you for taking the time to attend and your involvement. This remarkable gathering of Nebraskans would not be possible without your support and active participation. The first session of today's legislative summit is the congressional report from the members of our federal delegation. We all know that what goes on in Washington has a major impact on our businesses, our profitability, and our personal lives. We are fortunate to live in a state in which our federal representatives are accessible, approachable, and willing to discuss the important issues. This kind of relationship obviously does not exist in every state, and we do not take our delegation members for granted. At this time, I'd like to ask all of our congressional representatives to join me on stage. I would like to first introduce Senator Ben Nelson. Elected in 2000, Senator Ben Nelson currently serves on the Agricultural Committee, the Armed Services Committee, and the powerful Appropriations Committee. Throughout his years on Capitol Hill, Senator Nelson has played a key role as a moderate in a partisan environment. As senator and when he was governor, his door has always been open to Nebraska and our business community. Senator Nelson has received the U.S. Chamber's Spirit of Enterprise Award for his voting record and support of the business community. We all know Senator Nelson is retiring from the Senate at the end of this year. Thank you, Senator, for a job well done. The Nebraska business community appreciates your service and your commitment to Nebraska over the decades. Senator Ben Nelson.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Tom, for that introduction. It clearly is a type of introduction that my father would have enjoyed, but my mother would have believed. And, you know, Diane joined us here today, and last night we were just sitting around talking at dinner, and all of a sudden she said, "I love you and I can't live without you." I said, "Oh, that's very, very sweet, thank you. Is that you talking or the wine talking?" She said, "That's me talking to my wine." Well, my remarks are going to be unusually maybe short today because I want to leave enough time for Congressman Fortenberry to explain his charts. So you better be prepared for about an hour and a half. Just kidding, Jeff. Fortunately, his skin is thicker than his hair. And so, new stuff. Yeah, new stuff. That's not the Nebraska breakfast. And I'd like to thank the Chamber and all of you personally for the opportunity to join you today. I'm going to do a couple of things. First, I'd like to address some of the concerns that we face as a country. Second, I'll give you my view of what will or won't happen in Washington this year, and just a little later I'll make an announcement. But first, a word about the farm bill that isn't. I visited farmers, as I know my colleagues have this last week, and ranchers across the state, and they kept asking me the same question: why hasn't Congress come together to pass a farm bill? I couldn't give them a good reason why we hadn't, because there really isn't a good reason. So I told them the truth. Because of partisanship, driven by special interests and ideological extreme views and strategies that have all led to deadlock and gridlock. But Congress has passed a farm bill nearly every 4 to 5 years for a number of decades. Now, the Senate stuck to tradition, and we passed a 5-year bill with broad bipartisan support with only regional differences. But it's held up in the House, even though the House Ag Committee has sent its bill out of committee. It's unlikely to get a vote, and we don't know whether it will or why. It sort of reminded me of what the late Senator George W. Norris used to say when he would come back to Nebraska. He said, "I've come back to tell you the truth." Well, so am I, at least as I see the truth. In Washington, the word compromise has become a dirty 4-letter word, and bipartisanship has become harder to find every day. Those who use that word today rarely practice it, and it's a cover to satisfy folks back home who know that compromise and bipartisanship are essential to move our country forward. Gridlock and deadlock result from ideologues who promise not to compromise and consider bipartisanship contrary to their platform. When I went to Washington some 12 years ago, I set out to make the new Republican president, a friend of mine from our governor days, successful. Why? Because his success would surely transfer to our country, and we would enjoy that success as a nation of Americans, not Republicans or Democrats. And during those years, I worked across the aisle to help pass tax cuts in 2001, 2003, to help create the Department of Homeland Security after 9/11, to pass new prescription drug benefits for seniors in Medicare, to establish independent benchmarks to measure progress or lack thereof in Iraq, and on the Gang of 14 that enabled votes, up or down votes, on judicial nominees. Now, you can be sure that I was criticized very roundly by some within my party. They threatened to primary me in 2006 if I continued to work with the President and the Republicans. But I knew that this was what I was sent to Washington to do: work for solutions, the right solutions for our country. When I worked as co-chair with John McCain to form the Gang of 14 to stop the so-called nuclear option and get Republican-nominated federal judges an up or down vote, I was attacked by partisan Democrats because this is not the way it's supposed to work. 60-vote filibusters had become commonplace. I tell you this not because I think the Democrats have had it right all the time, nor because I think the Republicans are always wrong. No. It's because I know it's possible to work across the aisle. I had done it at least for the first 8 years. But today, ideologues, party bosses, and special interests have taken over Washington. Super PACs with enormous wallets filled with shadowy donors can now determine the outcome of an election, federal or local. Sound familiar? So until we have elected officials willing to tell these folks no, we're destined to face gridlock. Take the super regulatory environment on water and air, just to name two. We all want to drink our water, and we want to be able to breathe our air. But what happens with government? The bureaucrats push as far to the extreme as they can. Business and industry push back as far as you can, and you should. But where is the common ground? Where does common sense come in? And when you add partisanship and the power to win the next election, guess what? Gridlock. My political math is different than the political math I experience in Washington these days. I'm about addition and multiplication. Washington is about subtraction and division. Both parties are to blame for the division, and neither truly works to multiply support for an issue. The politics of the wrong math keeps our economic engine idling in neutral, actually probably losing ground. As you probably remember, for 8 years as governor, I pursued the theme of One Nebraska, bringing Republicans and Democrats together, rural and urban, youth and seniors, east and west, and the panhandle, all together by using addition and multiplication. I knew, and I think we all know, that if something isn't good for your family, isn't good for your neighborhood, isn't good for your community, it isn't good for our state, it just isn't good. I want to thank the Chamber for those 8 years in particular, because we compromised when necessary. We reached out to all, and the economic engine developed and created more than 100,000 new jobs during that year. There's no magic, just the right math. It's possible, but things have to change. In the Senate, I spent as much time working with Republican leaders Trent Lott and Bill Frist as with my caucus, because I knew that's what it took to get something done. True bipartisanship, maybe nonpartisanship, but compromise and common solutions to our continuing problems as a nation. Now, I promised you I'd give you my ideas on what's going to happen between now and the election, and then during the so-called lame duck post-election. So, what does the future hold for us on the many items of unfinished business with just weeks before the election? I'd like to tell you that this story has a happy ending, but at this point I just don't know. But here's what I do know, or at least what I expect. Nothing substantive will be done before the election. The sequestration, which was passed last year to avert the disaster of default hanging over this country, have you seen what the debacle and the loss of Standard & Poor's ratings, among other things, has cost us in extra borrowing costs? The GAO suggests that it's somewhere between $1 and $2 billion of additional interest charges because of that debacle and the near default, $1.2 billion, and that's that's only for 1 year, and that can go on indefinitely in the future. Now, the super committee, as it was called, failed as I expected it would, and there's now only talk of cutting spending, not truly serious efforts to achieve it in the near future. continuing uncertainty for business, making planning difficult, and both investment and reinvestment unnecessarily challenging. So when will this change? 3 words: after the election. As long as unlimited money and winning the next election trump country, we will be idling in neutral, or worse, in reverse. When and how will this change? Everyone in this room can calculate the various potential scenarios. The White House changes or the White House doesn't change. The Senate majority changes or it doesn't. Both remain the same. The White House or the House majority narrows or it grows. And while these are all interesting discussions, maybe the most important question for all is, after the election, will we be able to come back together as a nation? And if so, when? Can Congress put aside bitterness? Does the next campaign begin on November 7? Will the lame duck be productive like the one 2 years ago? Or will it be a daffy duck, a dizzy duck, or a dead duck? Or will there be too many cans kicked down the road to even be able to deal with them? Will Congress simply pass a short-term resolution and send it into 2013, say February 15, 2013? Unfortunately, there are just too many unknowns, too many uncertainties. But the one thing I know for certain, things have to change to get better. If we remain perpetually divided, can we ever be one nation again? And as someone who has always tried to reach across party lines and work to bring both Democrats and Republicans together, I know firsthand that the problems we face weren't created by one party or one president, one Congress, or even one generation. And if we're serious about solving the problems of the nation, we'll need to realize there isn't simply a Democratic solution or a Republican solution or even a bipartisan solution to these challenges. We need to meet our challenges in a nonpartisan way, putting this nation ahead of partisan agendas and the needs of the American people ahead of political parties and special interests. That's what we've done in Nebraska, and I believe that's what needs to be done in Washington. Now, there are countless examples of nonpartisan successes in Nebraska at all levels of government, local, state, and federal. So many that we often take them for granted, but we shouldn't. And one example of Nebraskans setting aside politics and working together is the new STRATCOM facility located at Offutt Air Force Base. Today, I am pleased to announce that the United States Army Corps of Engineers has received the first phase of funding, $120 million, and will award the contract to begin construction on the new STRATCOM headquarters this afternoon. It's on its way. Now, this project began with a $10 million earmark in 2009. And while some may actually think it's a 4-letter word, it's actually 7. And construction will begin before the next winter sets in. Now, I can assure you that when it comes to securing the nation, the personnel I've worked with at STRATCOM and Offutt don't check party registrations when they're doing their jobs. The men and women at Offutt and throughout our entire armed forces are Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, and they protect all Americans, Democrats, Republicans, and Independents. And I'm proud to say that the Nebraska congressional delegation, particularly Senators Heath Mello and Abby Cornett, the Nebraska legislature, and the business community have all taken the same nonpartisan approach in making sure that this project moves forward. I want to also thank my colleague Mike Johanns for his help in getting this project through a lot of the last-minute politics and the bureaucracies in Washington. He was there standing side by side in a nonpartisan way to get this done. Thank you very, very much, Mike. We all know this project not only will help our national security to keep us safe, but the project will create jobs and economic activity for Nebraska. It will strengthen the missions of STRATCOM and Offutt. And Nebraskans will continue to play a huge part in helping to secure this nation and the world. And working together, I believe there are additional opportunities for Nebraska in leading the way to help meet the needs of our nation and the world. So there's an example of all of us working together for the good of our community, our state, and our country. May there be many more. May you insist that there be many more. Thank you all for the opportunity to join you today and to have served the people of this great state and this country for the last 20 years. God bless all our men and women in uniform, and may God continue to bless the United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. It's my pleasure now to introduce Senator Mike Johanns. Senator Mike Johanns was elected to the U.S. Senate in 2008. In a short amount of time, he has become a rising star on Capitol Hill, primarily due to his past experience as Secretary of Agriculture, Governor, and his overall thoughtful approach. Senator Johanns serves on 5 committees: Agriculture, Banking, Environment, the Environment and Public Works, Veterans Affairs, and Indian Affairs. Senator Johanns has always listened to the concerns of the business community, including during his time as mayor of Lincoln and governor. Thank you, Senator, for your hard work. Senator Johanns is the recipient of the U.S. Chamber's Spirit of Enterprise Award for his voting record and support of the business community. Senator Mike Johanns.
Well, thank you very much for the nice introduction and the warm welcome. It's good to see everybody here. What a remarkable turnout. We appreciate it. This is an event I look forward to every year. And just like every year I've been here before, I look around the room and virtually every seat is filled. So outstanding turnout. Let me just say to my colleague and friend, Ben Nelson, thank you for the recognition. Let me offer a word or two of that is hopeful when it comes to our congressional delegation. Really, without exception, I can't think of a single time in the last 4 years where this delegation hasn't worked together for the benefit of the state of Nebraska. Now, that does not mean that our voting records are identical. You would not want that. You would not expect that. But I would tell you it's been an honor and a pleasure to be Ben Nelson's junior senator from Nebraska. Only in the Senate can you be 62 years old and be called junior. Senator Nelson referenced the project at Offutt, and we're all proud of that, rightfully so. Senator Nelson, I thank you for your leadership on that. It was some initial money way back when that was put that in motion, if you will, and I must admit, way back then, it looked like this was probably an impossible dream. But through his efforts on armed services and appropriations, he has brought it to reality. But it's not the only example of where we have worked together. I remember a federal district court judgeship. We knew there was going to be a vacancy. I kind of wondered to myself how Ben would handle that. Well, I didn't have to wonder long because I got a phone call. And it was Ben Nelson. He said, Mike, I've got someone in mind, but I'm not going to announce them because I would like you to meet with this person and hopefully give them your blessing. It was John Girard on the Supreme Court of Nebraska. Well, I took that opportunity to meet with him the next time I was back home, and it just confirmed what I already knew about Judge Girard, that he was the right person for the job. There were some last-minute issues there, but Ben and I worked together, and we were able to get him confirmed really in record time. And now he sits as the United States District Court judge, and in my judgment, he will be not only an outstanding choice by the senior senator, but he will be an outstanding judge for our state. So, Ben, thank you for your service. We appreciate it. I also wanted to start my comments today by talking a little bit about our state and where we're at. I take such interest in what's happening here for obvious reasons. I serve in the Senate, but Ben and I have had the opportunity to serve as your governor. Dave Heineman was my lieutenant governor in most of those years. I don't think we always appreciate how remarkable our state is compared to other states across the country. We hear the statistics and we cite them over and over again, and it's amazing. But do you realize, ladies and gentlemen, as Nebraskans, you don't owe any money? Our Constitution says we can't borrow more than $100,000. And so when we talk about balancing the budget, it's real. It's not, well, I balanced the budget, and oh, by the way, I went out and borrowed, $200 million to do it, like most states do. Virtually every state, as a matter of fact. No, we don't do it that way. We only spend the money that we have. What that means is that during tough times, the governor is going to propose a painful budget. We know that. It is part of our ethic. But because of that, and because of the leadership of people like Dave Heineman, here we sit today with an unemployment rate, Governor, of 3.8%. Do I have that right? That's the envy of the United States. We are a traditional economy. We haven't discovered oil, if you know what I'm saying. We kind of do the things that a traditional economy would do. We have 3.8% unemployment. Our retirement plans are funded. Our budget is balanced. The bills are paid on time. And we're optimistic about our future. Now, I also want to say that's not just because of a good governor's efforts. The unicameral works with the governor, but the business community does what we hope a business community will do. They take the risk. I do believe that you build your businesses. You are the ones that are putting yourselves at risk. You're borrowing the money, you're putting in the hours, and I can't thank you enough for that effort. These days, I'm traveling all across the state of Nebraska, talking to folks who are in the ag industry and business roundtables. We've had a number of town halls. I'll do about a dozen of them during this August work period. We've had a great turnout. Here's what I'm talking about. And here's what I'm hearing from Nebraskans. We certainly have a long list of things to do prior to year end. There's no doubt about it. Think about the list. 0103 tax rates. They expire, and we go back to the old tax rates at midnight on December 31. We have the situation that the governor talked about with the AMT patch. And Governor, you're absolutely right. I actually have a chart that illustrates that if we don't come to grips with the AMT, then at a certain income level that no one would describe as a wealthy person, you're going to pay higher taxes because of the failure to fix the AMT. The payroll tax, I believe, will go up. I question the wisdom of that approach, but having said that, I think that probably that 50% reduction is going to expire. We've got the $1 trillion sequester. We've got an estate tax which will go from a $5 million exemption to a $1 million exemption with, get this, a 55% rate. So if you have the misfortune of passing away and you are a farmer, a rancher, or a small or medium-sized business person, and we're back in the old estate tax system of a 55% rate, then the government will take 55% of what you have spent your life working for as a tax on your death, if you can possibly imagine. So we have a whole long list of items that we've got to try to come to grips with. Now, here's where I think we're at between now and Election Day. We will go back sometime in mid-September. I think our first vote is somewhere around September 10th or 11th, 12th, whatever that Monday would be. I would imagine that we'll be in session 2 to 3 weeks. I think we'll break then. People will go home. They'll finish up the campaign season. And I anticipate we will be called back for a lame duck session. I do believe that the rubber will not meet the road until the lame duck session. I wish I could give you better news on that. I wish I could tell you that this list will at least start to be addressed, but I really do believe the entire list will be left for action in the lame duck session. Well, there's a number of difficulties with that. One is, how do you jam that kind of effort into the remaining 6 weeks with 2 major holidays, even if you work Christmas, Thanksgiving, etc.? Going to be very, very difficult to do. The other thing that I will say to you about that is that, unfortunately for you, that's going to bring a lot of uncertainty to our economy between now and the end of the year, because quite honestly, we can't tell you where this is going to end up. That problem was solvable, but it wasn't solved. These issues could have been brought to the Senate floor. They have not been brought to the Senate floor, and so consequently, this is what we face. Elections will have a lot to do with how this turns out. If Senate control changes, you kind of wonder what will happen then. If the White House changes, what happens then? So I think there's just a tremendous amount of uncertainty until we get past November and we start to come to grips with this. I want to end up with a couple of thoughts. First thing I want to tell you is that Ben Nelson has said so many things, I believe, that are right about the condition in Washington. It's not very good. It's acidic. You know, it's one of those situations where we need to be hitting on all cylinders because we've got some huge problems out there, and a lot less than that is happening. Some months ago, I had an opportunity to support a group of senators that were working on the Simpson-Bowles plan. You remember that deficit reduction plan of a year or so ago? Well, 6 senators sat down. They got immediately nicknamed the Gang of 8, and they started working through that plan as a framework to try to come up with some ideas that might gain support to deal with deficit reduction, tax reform, a whole host of issues. I stood up with a colleague of mine, a Democrat from Colorado by the name of Michael Bennett, and we said, we've got to do everything we can to support this effort. And it wasn't long after that that we were asked to join the group. So now for many, many months, Senator Bennett and myself have been a part of a new group called the Gang of 8, which we hope to build into the Gang of 45 and 50 and 55 and 60 on a plan that sets our country on a better course than where we are headed today. You know, I don't say this in a necessarily partisan way, but, you know, the plan that was the most bipartisan in terms of vote was the President's budget plan the last 2 years. He got no votes. No one supported it. No one. It tells me that we have to head in a better direction. We cannot sustain trillion-dollar deficits forever, and we're going to all have to give and take to try to get there. Well, I end up with that, and one final thought, and that is I want to wrap up by saying to Senator Nelson, thank you for your work on the Armed Services Committee. It means a lot to our state. I want to assure you that as Senator Nelson starts thinking about what's next in his life, I want to promise you that very definitely a Nebraskan is going to have a seat on that committee, and personally, I would be honored to be a member of the Armed Services Committee if that's the way it turns out, and my hope is that it does. Thank you very much. God bless you.
Thank you, Senator. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce Congressman Lee Terry. Congressman Lee Terry represents the 2nd Congressional District, elected in 1998. He is the longest-serving member of Nebraska's congressional delegation. Congressman Terry serves on the powerful Committee on Energy and Commerce, which oversees energy, healthcare, telecommunications, trade, and many business-related issues. He is considered a leader on energy and a heavyweight in the realm of telecommunications. Thank you, Congressman, especially for your efforts to provide more affordable and abundant energy supplies. Because of his efforts, Congressman Terry is a recipient of the U.S. Chamber's Spirit of Enterprise Award. Congressman Lee Terry.
Well, thank you all. Let me just admit from the start here that I am not a gang member. I guess Ben and Mike like to brag about their gang affiliations. I don't have one to brag about. But I do want to thank Ben for his service to the state of Nebraska as governor and his 12 years in the U.S. Senate. I finally figured out, we have these Nebraska breakfasts when we're in session, and for 3 years we've now had our Nebraska breakfasts here during August recess. But he came up to us at our last one and said, do we really need to meet in September? We only have, I think, one day in September that we could do a Nebraska breakfast. So he got everyone to agree that we can just waive that one. And then it finally dawned on me, that was when we were going to roast him. He must have gotten wind of that and wanted to cancel it. So let's do that here today. Anyway, I'll get to some more serious issues. But I do want to, I'm pretty proud. My oldest son is a senior in high school, so we're going through that phase of looking at colleges. And his foreign language in school has been Latin. I took Spanish and can't remember any of it except Donde está el baño? And that's about it. But in honors Latin last spring, he came to me and said, have you heard of the Latin word Senecus? And I said, no. He goes, well, it's actually the root for the word Senate. And the actual meaning for Senecus is house of old men. It's like, wow, it's true today. But I've always envisioned the Senate side as kind of this Turkish bath where they all just go around and sit around all day. Because we send these bills over there and they never get any attention paid to them, so that they've got to be doing something like that over there. Now, during my 2 weeks home, or week and a half home, I've tried to be out of the office as much as possible, meeting with constituents, but doing a lot of company walkthroughs, small businesses in particular. So in getting their feedback on not only Washington, but how do they feel about business and what's going on out there. And I've also been out to a lot of community events. And there's a series of questions that have come up, and I might as well just get those out of the way, because they're probably ones that will be asked in a few minutes. First of all, the most often asked question, no, I don't know if Martinez can throw any better this year. We just know he's been receiving more coaching. No, I don't know why Tyler Moore left or if it has anything to do with line coaching or a girlfriend. And yes, I do know Paul Ryan. Those are the three. But after, when I talk to small businesses in particular, I hear one word, and that word from them is uncertainty. And uncertainty is the enemy of business. It stalls out growth, it delays plans, delays decisions. And so under that category, the question that's always asked is, what about the fiscal cliff? What about the taxes? Now, Mike brought that up. If nothing is done, keep that in mind, if nothing is done, the tax code reverts to the pre-01 levels. So that means, as Mike mentioned, that on midnight, the stroke of midnight of December 31st to January 1st, all tax brackets increase, child tax credits are halved, and others on the individual side. Then on the corporate tax side or business tax side, you have corporate tax increasing, you have new tax or taxes increasing on dividends and capital investments. Capital gains goes up. Accelerated depreciation goes away. And so there's a lot of impact on businesses, not only with the estate tax that Mike specified, and that has created a great deal of uncertainty. And so we have to deal with that. The House of Representatives did pass a 1 full year extension of the current tax code for the entire calendar year of 2013. That's one of those bills that's in the rack next to the Turkish bath in the Senate. They'll get to it hopefully during the lame duck session, but it has to be done. Simply doing nothing and allowing the tax code to revert and a tax increase to occur on individuals and businesses may give a level of certainty, but it will have negative ramifications to our economy, and most every independent, nonpartisan reports have said that could lead to 700,000 lost jobs. That's not the direction we need to go in a slow, slogging economy. The next major issue that needs to be discussed, especially right here in this museum, is sequestration. Sequestration was supposed to be the punishment for not getting the big deal done. The big deal of finding the necessary reductions in spending, and the big deal of reforming entitlements that just in a few years from now will really take over most of our budget, as I'm sure Jeff will show with his charts. So, sequestration is the penalty, a $1.2 trillion cut that the super committee couldn't come to an agreement on how to do $1.2 trillion in cuts otherwise. Half of that $1.2 trillion hits defense. And we are already seeing in Bellevue, Nebraska, and our metro area, that businesses are starting to hear from Stratcom and others that the second year of their contract is likely to be voided. So it does impact this area and jobs. And I frankly don't believe that we should take our Defense Department and share and have one half of it put on it. Do I think there can be more cuts than the $400 billion that were already agreed to pre-debt limit discussions and sequestration? Probably, but those need to be studied and targeted, not just cut $600 billion off. So this is something that will impact. This is something that we have to deal with. It's been kicked down the road twice already, but the reality is the road is ended. There's no more road to kick the can down. We've got to make these decisions. They've got to be done in December. I've accepted the reality that both Ben and Mike have stated that we're not going to get those done before November 6th, but we better damn well get them done in December or get to work in January. I think it depends on the presidential race. So that's what we have to deal with in Congress for the rest of the year. And those are some pretty big issues that will have dramatic effects on our economy and creation of jobs. So with that, I will turn it back to my colleagues here. So Tom, thank you all for being here, and thank you for being great people in our community.
Thank you, Congressman Terry. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce Congressman Jeff Fortenberry. Congressman Jeff Fortenberry has represented Nebraska's 1st congressional district since he was first elected in 2004. His experience in small business issues and extensive background in economics has served Nebraska well. Congressman Fortenberry sits on the Foreign Affairs Committee as well as the Agricultural Committee. In the House, he is a budget hawk, consistently reminding his colleagues of the nation's staggering debt and the threat it poses to America's future generations. A strong pro-business vote, the Congressman is the recipient of the U.S. Chamber's Spirit of Enterprise Award. Congressman Jeff Fortenberry.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Tom, for the kind introduction, and to the Chamber members, thank you all so much for joining us here and for all of your leadership in the various communities in which you serve. I don't know if Eddie Brown is still here, but what a beautiful job he did with the national anthem. I have heard the national anthem probably 20 times in the last 3 weeks. How many of you have watched more Olympics than you ever have? I certainly have. What a profound projection of America that these young people achieved on the world stage. A couple of times I just wanted to break out in tears, particularly seeing the young woman Missy Franklin, the swimmer. My daughter's a swimmer in high school, and seeing Missy Franklin, a 17-year-old, win a gold medal, them flashing back to her high school class, jumping up and down. They were kids. And when she got up there in front of the world and in front of the news cameras, just handled herself so extraordinarily well with humility and grace and style. And it just projected a vision, an image of America's strength to the rest of the world. I was so proud of them. I want to tell a quick story about Eddie Brown and his band Defunk. They are quite an extraordinary group, and they play a lot of music from the 70s. I was at an event for the Nebraska Heart Association. They do an annual heart ball in which they raise money to help kids with heart disease, and Defunk was the entertainment. And my wife and I were there with our 11-year-old daughter. And as the music began to play from the 70s, I looked at my table and I said, "This reminds me of high school." And I looked at my daughter and I said, "Do you want to dance?" And she said, "No." And I said, "That reminds me of high school." Anyway, Eddie, thank you so much for the beautiful job you did. Let me add a word of thanks as well for Senator Nelson's commitment to public service. 20 years, if you add it all up. Thank you, Senator, for all that you've done for the state. And I do think, because this is probably one of Senator Nelson's last times to have a town hall with the entire delegation, it would be appropriate. I hope I'm not divulging anything that has a high level of national security implication. But as you all know, the Secret Service has code names for high-ranking public officials when they move around. Particularly given this setting, I thought I'd tell you all that Senator Nelson's code name is Hair Force One. And it's good to see the senator in such a good mood today. I assume he's laughing. The senator's actually had a very good week. He's come back to Nebraska, and look, we're all a family here, so we can tell stories on one another. I heard about this. He was visiting some constituents and some businesses, and he went into a senior care center. And word got around that Senator Nelson was there. People started coming out of their rooms to see him, were shaking hands. People who were eating their meals dropped their forks and came over to see the senator. And he is a member of that august body, and so this was starting to go to his head a little bit. And he noticed there was one woman over there in the corner who had nothing to do with any of this, was paying no attention at all. And so the senator proudly walked over to her, stuck out his hand and said, "Hello, do you know who I am?" And the kind elderly lady looked at him and said, "Son, no, I don't. But if you go over to the front desk, I'm sure the nurse will be able to help you." Is he still laughing? Anyway, we try to be good sports with one another at the town hall meeting that we have almost every week in in Washington, D.C., known as the Nebraska Breakfast. So this is kind of mimicking that. And any of you who are in D.C. on a Wednesday when both bodies are in session, you are always invited to join with us where we unpack the events of the week and share a little good humor. I've finished 8 town meetings over the last week and a half, and they were good discussions with a lot of good Nebraskans. It wasn't me telling people what they need to know. It wasn't people standing up and telling me necessarily what I needed to know. It was a conversation with good, hard-working people who are deeply worried about the future of the country and who really do want to see us, as we like to say in Nebraska, get her done. And Governor Heineman alluded to something, as did Governor Johanns, that we have an extraordinary model here in Nebraska. It's a model that is operative in our culture. It's the way in which we conduct our family business. It's the way in which we conduct our business affairs, and it's the way in which we run governments. We don't spend money we don't have. We don't invent exotic financial instruments. We don't leverage liberalized credit and then expect other people to pay for it when it's broken. We try to move along steadily and do what is in the best interest of common sense and the public good. And in that regard, I'd like to give you an overview of how this Nebraska model could potentially serve our country very well by pointing out some things about where we are with the budget. Now, we are moving to an advanced technology phase with my so-called charts here, and we're using instrument ratings. Josh Moaning is going to help me with this. Where are you, Josh? You want to do this? I think that would be easier. Oh, I got it up there already. Good. Thank you. If you look at the screen, this is an overview of where your money is spent at the federal level. And this year's projected expenditures are $3.6 trillion, as you can see at the top. And the chart is divided into several different areas, slices of the pie, if you will. That blue area on the right is what we call discretionary spending in Washington. That is a Washington word that means Congress has control over it every year. And defense is the first blue slice of the pie. That's 19% of the overall budget. The next blue slice is what we call non-defense discretionary. Now, non-defense discretionary is basically everything else the government does other than the social support mechanisms of Social Security and health care programs and certain benefits. Roads, parks, education, everything else falls into that category of 18%. And frankly, the big budgetary fights trying to balance the budget have generally been over that 18% right there. Moving to the maroon area of the pie, the first one, the largest area of government expenditures, and what we call mandatory spending. In other words, those programs are mandatory. Whatever the demand is, the money goes out of the door, the way the law is currently written. Social Security at the bottom is 21% of the budget. The next slice is Medicare at 16%, Medicaid at 17%, and then other mandatory expenditures for federal benefits, supplemental security income for the disabled, certain veterans benefits are about 13%. Then that yellow slice of the pie there is net interest on the debt at 6%. By the way, this is color-coded to actually help the United States Senate understand this better, because this mimics the color of Jell-O that's served every week in the Senate. That was a new one. They hadn't heard that before. So let's go to the next slide, and that'll show you where revenues come from. Now, you remember the first number was $3.6 trillion expenditures. Revenues this year are projected to be $2.5 trillion. That bit of simple math there is $1.1 trillion. You have a $1.1 trillion gap, the deficit as we call it. The revenues come primarily from the individual income tax, which is the blue slice of the pie there, at nearly 50%. Now, an interesting statistic is that only about half of Americans pay income tax at all. Anybody working, however, is going to pay a payroll tax. That's the orange area there. That's 35% of the overall budget. Corporate income taxes, the gold area, is 10%. And then other estate receipts and gift taxes are about 9%. So I think it's important to look at a history of spending in order to understand where we are and how we got here. If you look from left to right, spending in 1990 was $1.25 trillion. In the year 2000, it was about $1.8 trillion. Again, this year, about $3.6 trillion. The size of federal spending, the size of the federal government has basically doubled in the last decade. Now, overspending leads to deficits. In 1990, there was about a $200 billion deficit. In the year 2000, there was actually a surplus of over $200 billion. Now we are at $1.1 trillion. Washington is getting way too used to the word trillion. Deficit upon deficit increases debt. 1990, the debt was $3 trillion, about $6 trillion in 2000. Now we're close to $16 trillion of debt. Basically, that is the size of the overall output of the United States economy. That is a real red flag. That is comparable to the situation that Greece finds itself in, for instance. Now, this is not Greece. We are not Greece. We have a very large and resilient economy, and I'd like to think the type of governance structure that can make hard and bold and constructive decisions to begin to turn this in a different direction in short order. The debt per capita, this debt is real. It's not something that sits out there that doesn't have any real effect. It has real effects on all of us. So if we were to pay this off individually in 1990, we'd have owed $13,000 per person. In the year 2000, about $20,000 per citizen. Now each citizen owes $51,000 to the United States government. I have 5 children. There's 7 of us. I owe $350,000 to the government in order to pay off this debt if we divided it that way. What are the consequences of this debt? Well, really, they're threefold. First, it's a grave injustice because it's pushing off the taxation to the future for the way in which we're currently living. That is a grave injustice to children and grandchildren. Secondly, it is a sale of the wealth assets of this country overseas, to overseas bondholders, places like China, which officially holds about $1 trillion of this debt, unofficially closer to $2 trillion. Now, what are the consequences of that? Well, you all know we've shifted a lot of manufacturing over there. They make the stuff, we buy the stuff, they have the cash, we run up debt, they hold the debt. It's a very dysfunctional marriage, and there's consequences to this. China has a system of governance and society unforeseen in the history of mankind. It is a hybrid model of communism and capitalism that is enriching a certain oligarchic class, and the benefits to the society are being plowed primarily into them and the buildup of military. So what is our response to the buildup of their Navy? We'll go send more Navy ships in the Pacific. Well, we better start thinking about our overspending as a real threat to national security, because it is, in addition to underwriting severe human rights abuses in that country, and that needs to stop. The third consequence of all this debt is that it is potentially inflationary. Now, how is that? Well, the Federal Reserve is going about the business of trying to hold interest rates very low to try to soft land this economy. When you do that, you devalue the dollar, and then the commodity prices that are pegged to the value of the dollar spike. Now, it is too difficult, I feel, to explain higher gas prices based on supply and demand fundamentals. And when gas prices, oil prices shoot up, other commodities follow. And I don't think supply and demand fundamentals explain it all. It is related to our monetary policy here. And that creates, that increase of prices is a form of taxation that is the most regressive form. It hits seniors the hardest, those on fixed income the hardest, who cannot adjust prices. It hits the poor the hardest, who have no recourse in this regard. So again, this debt has real consequences. I'm going to let you all in on another state secret. Debt is a form of taxation. It's just hidden from us all. But it can no longer be that hidden because the consequences are starting to manifest themselves collectively and impacting the system. Another problem here is the indecision in Washington to boldly and creatively and constructively deal with this is creating uncertainty for you all, as Congressman Terry well said. I would suggest to you that a decision to actually deal with the substantial overspending here, coupled with the right type of tax reform, would actually be stimulative. And I guarantee you if there was a grand enough deal, there would be something in it that everybody here would hate. But you know what? We're at a point where we're going to all have to be patriots here, because to let this situation drift and to not deal with it, either as political leaders in Congress, either as a White House, or as Americans, it will be dealt with to us. And the consequences of that are very, very severe. It would be better to step up and deal with this forthrightly in the right type of manner, with bipartisan cooperation and cooperation across Washington. It will take strong leadership in Congress as well as the White House cooperating on this. And I think, frankly, Nebraskans are ready to get this done. A constructive solution, I actually think, would solve this problem of uncertainty and accelerate the turnaround, accelerate revenues back to the government. As you and other entrepreneurs get off the sidelines, as your risk-to-reward equation changes, and you're willing to take your pent-up energy, which I know you all have, and put it to work again and give people jobs. I think Washington, while we are not responsible for job creation, we are certainly responsible for helping set the conditions for job creation, and I think it's time to get this done. So with that, I'll conclude, and again, thank you all so much for the invitation to be here with you, and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Congressman Fortenberry. Next, I would like to introduce Congressman Adrian Smith. Representing Nebraska's 3rd Congressional District is Congressman Adrian Smith. He was first elected in 2006. Congressman Smith sits on the influential House Ways and Means Committee, which is responsible for the nation's tax policies. Nebraska is well served with Congressman Smith as a member of this committee, which helps oversee America's trade issues, job creation incentives, and other tax-related provisions. Because of his strong record, Congressman Smith is a recipient of the U.S. Chamber's Spirit of Enterprise Award. Congressman Adrian Smith.
Good afternoon. It's great to be here. I'm that guy way out west. Good to see you, Mayor. Yesterday I was in Falls City. Tomorrow I will be in Harrison. That's roughly 600 miles. Unlikely Terry's district, I think 600 feet is more applicable. But I say that just to give a little reference of what we are as a state. But I know that I'm standing here in front of a lot of business folks from eastern Nebraska, and I'm glad that we're in this together. Perhaps there may not even be a 3rd district without some of the growth and various development in Lincoln and Omaha. Not that I, really advocated for that larger district, Governor, of 75 counties, Mike Flood. But it is a time, though, that I'm grateful to have an opportunity to serve. If the decisions were easy, they would have been made a long time ago, and we would have no discussions. And I get frustrated that there oftentimes is more bickering in Washington than there is true substantive debate. I remember my days in the legislature, sometimes even between Mayor Beitler and I, then state senator. We could have a debate, but we could end up with a resolution that we could move forward with. Perhaps not everything we got, but something, everything we wanted, but something that we could move forward with. So we're looking at taxes. And our tax code is so complicated, convoluted, complex, you name it, that the cost of compliance, just figuring out how much you owe, is cumbersome and expensive. That we have people realizing this, and they come and say, we'll give up our tax preference in the tax code for a lower rate, something that is more straightforward. It may not be as low as they would actually prefer, but we could be more competitive in the world marketplace with a better tax code. And so we, as Lee was saying, we have voted to extend the current rates 1 year, and that includes what I would call a compromise relating to the estate tax. You might imagine that the estate tax, some call it the death tax, certainly that is applicable, but it is due to go back up to 55%, as Senator Johanns was stating. 55% after the first $1 million. I'm still one who thinks that $1 million is a lot of money. Let me be clear, it's not what it used to be. And when a manufacturing facility run by the 2nd generation outside of Mitchell, Nebraska tells me that the estate tax will devastate their business, I kind of pay attention. So even though I think in the House we would have the votes to fully repeal the death tax because it is double taxation, we understand that that may not pass the Senate. And so we have proposed an extension of what we have right now. Instead of going back up to 55% or going to 0, we've said, okay, 35% as it is today with a $5 million exemption per spouse. So there is a little sliver of compromise from time to time, but that is something that I think is far more tangible than I think most businesses would prefer. And some advocates for the estate tax say, well, you can plan around it, not if it's up and down and temporary and constantly expiring. There's that uncertainty, as was mentioned earlier. That's very, very problematic. So we're working on that. The Farm Bill, I think it has been a good time for members of Congress to be back in their districts. hearing from constituents that it is important to get a farm bill passed. Last time we passed it, that was my first term, and it was a year late. I hope we can avoid that this time because it certainly does not bring any certainty to the equation. And then it also points to the fact, though, that we've got crop insurance and various other components that are important. But all said, I have to say that the most common request from my constituents is to be left alone. Now there we see these regulations, and we try to pull back on those out of Washington whenever we can, and when we have the votes to do that. But we're looking at so much intrusion in business that is adding to the uncertainty as well. Now, with the Farm Bill, about 80% of that spending is the nutrition program. Mostly, or a large chunk of that is food stamps. So let me just give you a few numbers to consider here. In the year 2000, we had a bill to pay for food stamps of $18 billion. This year, it will be $85 billion. Now, there has been proposed a 2% reduction. That's 2% after it's more than quadrupled. So we need to look at that. I don't want to see any one component of any particular bill, one single title become a deal breaker, but we need to end up with good public policy and something that we can move forward with that, like I said, would add to certainty out there in our economy. I know, and I know in the interest of time I'll make this short, but you've probably heard some of my colleagues say that which is wrong with our country right now can be fixed with what is right about our country. And unfortunately, believe it or not, there's a lot of disagreement about what's right about our country. Now let's talk about the Olympics a little more. Yes, we won a lot of medals. I'm glad we did. That makes me proud. We also saw a lot of athletes representing other countries having trained here in the U.S., having benefited from some of the great things about our country. I think that's a reflection. And as I look, whether it's trade issues or various other issues, I know that we should be leaders in the world. We have been, and let's continue in that direction. Let's look to innovation rather than the heavy hand of government. Let's look to ideas from the private sector, because even though I know tax dollars and the government was involved in building these planes, I know that the private sector was immensely involved in this entire facility, just as one example. So I look forward to hearing more from you. I appreciate our dialogue that we can have, even if you don't happen to reside in one of the 75 counties of the 3rd District. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to be here today to hear from you, and look forward to working together. God bless.
Thank you, Congressman Smith. We do have time for just a few questions. We have microphones out in the audience, so if you have a question, please stand up, raise your hand, and we'll get a microphone to you. Is there a question over here?
We're involved with animal agriculture in Nebraska, and with corn prices 8 going higher per bushel, can you support a relaxation of the renewable fuels mandate under the EPA regulations? Thank you.
Wow, it's getting late.
Yeah.
Time's up, Tom.
Yeah, we should have quit while we were ahead. Well, the answer, I think, is that we need to get the Farm Bill in place. That's the answer to the challenges we have. There's research money in there for additional biofuels and other alternatives and things of that sort to get us into using switchgrass and less reliance on corn. But it would be the wrong, if it's still one of the policies that we want to not rely on foreign sources for as much of our energy needs as we have today, we've got to continue to push, number one. Number two, we have an industry that is challenged by the high prices of corn, just as others are, but it would in many ways pull the rug out from under the industry. And there are other reasons as well. But I think the true answer is we just need to get a farm bill done.
I don't today, just to be very direct with your question. And let me offer, if I could, a perspective on that. When I became Secretary of Agriculture in January of 2005, I don't know the exact price of corn, but it was probably about $1.95. At that point in time, there was very low fluctuation in the corn price because it was a commodity that the government had so, in my judgment, mismanaged through the years that there really wasn't a fair market for corn. Now, the flip side of that, $1.95 corn, was massive amounts of money were paid out under the counter-cyclical program and the loan deficiency program. Because the prices were so low, those targets kicked in and required the government payments to be paid out. I'll never forget when Hurricane Katrina hit, corn prices dropped from about $2 to about $1.60, $1.65. Loan deficiency payments were locked in like that, and $4 billion went out the door of the USDA. The Office of Management and Budget called me and said, "What the heck is going on over there?" And the reason why it was happening is because you didn't really have a market as such for corn, again, because of the government intervention. Well, what's happening today is you're seeing a marketplace that is responding to the most difficult situation we've faced in a long time, and that's a drought. We've been all over the state over the last week. I'll go next week out to western Nebraska, but there isn't a place in the state that's good. I've been to Ohio, I've been to Iowa, I've been all across the Corn Belt, and it's as bad there as it is here. Now, what is also happening is that ethanol plants are closing. Permanently? I don't know. We'll see what happens. But there are 5 plants in Nebraska now closed because high corn prices are not good for them either. And that's just the reality of what we're dealing with, is that all of a sudden you have a marketplace with a very short supply, and it's hitting everybody who needs the supply, including the ethanol producer. I'll wrap up with this. I had a drought roundtable yesterday, and we were out at Curtis. There was a difference of opinion there, but there was this one gentleman, he said, "Mike, I raise corn and I feed cattle." He said, please do not waive the RFS. He said, cattle feeders in my area are dependent upon the DDGs, and all of a sudden our supply is disrupted. That's another piece of this that I think is important to recognize. So what I've said is, look, I want to see what the corn harvest looks like. I know it's going to be bad. How bad, we won't know until the combines are running. Then we can make an assessment as to where we're at. Final thought, keep in mind, if the RFS is waived, there will be consequences for our state. It won't be 5 ethanol plants that will close. It will be more than that. Some will reopen, some won't. And, you know, we have put a lot of investment into ethanol over the years. It used to be that everybody supported ethanol. I appreciate with the shortage that's not the case, but the reality is in many parts of our state it's been a remarkable addition to the market. And people who are out there producing and feeding cattle and producing corn will tell you that. So I'm anxious to see where we're at. In about 30 to 60 days we'll have a better idea and be able to make a better assessment.
Another question? My, what a bashful audience. Is there a question back here?
Thank you. Can you hear me up there? There you go.
Yes.
Thanks to both of our United States Senators for being aware of switchgrass. Appreciate that. We hear elected officials talk on and on about the debt. I personally have not ever heard an elected official talk about the net worth of our government. We talk about our liabilities, but I've never heard us talk about our assets, those things which are earned, like owned by the federal government, such as buildings, automobiles, computers, so forth, servers. And it would be interesting to hear if we also don't talk about cash flow very much. It's all about the liabilities. And it would be interesting to hear something about the positive side. Thank you.
Well, I'll give a little crack at this. I can't give you a figure of the total asset value of the United States, and it would be extraordinarily difficult, by the way, to tag some value on Stratcom, to put a value on the hardware assets that we're looking at that were representative of our military buildup. So I don't have a good answer. There probably is one out there as to what the total value of assets that the United States government holds, and then how do you begin to evaluate a road or other things that aren't readily sellable in a market. So that's a tough one. In regards to cash flow, one thing that we also have to think about is, as I put up that chart earlier, net interest on that debt, we're dodging a huge bullet right now in terms of what a spike of interest rates could actually do to the overall budget. So while we're sitting here looking at how we reasonably target reductions in overall spending, if you did have a turnaround of the business cycle and a normal rise of interest rates, you would see significant problems with further budgetary constraints and increased levels of debt, potentially wiping out large portions of the savings that we're trying to undertake. So that's, again, one of the consequences here that's not unpacked readily. I appreciate your question. I don't know an answer. Maybe we could visit afterward and we could or look that up for you right quick as to what the total asset value, if somebody's actually calculated that. I'm sure they have at some point.
I will add just one quick thing. One of the bills that we passed probably early summer was actually making the GSA produce a list of all of the properties that the government owns, not necessarily the chairs or the computers in it, because as some of the oversight and investigations have shown, there's many empty federal buildings in downtown areas of major cities that have just sat there. And so there is an opportunity there to sell off some of the government assets to hopefully move towards debt. But it's amazing that we have to pass an act of Congress to even get a list of those type of properties.
In the interest of time, we're going to cut the session at this point to move on to the next part of the program. But in closing, I'm a very proud American, as each and every one of you are in this room. I'm a very proud native Nebraskan, as many of you in this room are. My family were some of the original settlers of northeast Nebraska. And why do we have such a passion for being proud Nebraskans? Lots of reasons. Those include we have a state full of hardworking, conscientious, honest people. And aren't we fortunate to have a governor and a congressional delegation that are as dedicated and hardworking as ours are from the state of Nebraska? Please join me in expressing our appreciation to each and every one of them for that dedicated service.